Well, hello again, fellow adventurers, and welcome back to our little home on wheels. For those of you who might be new here, we're John and Karen, and just a few years ago, we traded in our house keys and a lifetime of routine for the keys to this van, which we affectionately call Wanda. Our mission is simple: to prove that life doesn't slow down after 50, it just finds a different gear. Some days, that gear is for cruising along a sun-drenched coast. Other days it's for climbing mountains, both the literal ones outside the window and the figurative ones inside our own heads. Today's story is about one of those days. It's a story about fear, about courage, and about what it really means to embrace this life, one shaky step at a time. We found ourselves parked in what felt like the heart of a giant's rock garden, the Italian Dolomites. The morning air was so crisp it practically crackled, and the sun was just beginning to kiss the peaks of these colossal limestone cathedrals. They rose up around our van, pale gray and jagged against a sky of impossible blue. It was the kind of beauty that makes you feel both infinitesimally small and infinitely blessed to be there. I was buzzing with that familiar travel energy, the thrum of a new day and a new adventure. But as I made our morning coffee, I noticed Karen was unusually quiet. She was staring out the window, her teacup cradled in both hands, but her gaze wasn't one of simple admiration. It was something deeper, more complex. I recognized the look. It was the same one she'd had when we first looked at the brochure for this van, the same one that flickered across her face when I unfolded a map of a country where we didn't speak the language. It was a look of awe, tinged with a healthy dose of apprehension. This life, this grand, untethered adventure we had chosen, was my dream, yes, but it was one I had convinced her to share. Most days, she loved it as fiercely as I did. But some days, the sheer scale of it all could feel a little overwhelming. "What do you think?" I asked, sliding a mug of coffee toward her. "Fancy a bit of a climb today? There's a trail not far from here, a via ferrata. They say the views are out of this world." She finally turned from the window, a small, uncertain smile on her lips. A via ferrata, an iron path, is a mountain route equipped with steel cables, ladders, and fixed anchors. It allows people who aren't expert rock climbers to traverse spectacular and otherwise inaccessible terrain. It's adventure, but with a safety net. In my mind, it was the perfect Dolomite experience. "An iron path," she repeated, the word sounding foreign and sharp. "You mean, climbing on the side of one of those?" She gestured with her chin towards the monumental peak that was dominating our view. "It's not really climbing, love," I said, trying to sound more casual than I felt. I knew this was a big ask. "It's more like a very steep, very exciting hike. We'll have harnesses, helmets, we'll be clipped in the whole time. Perfectly safe. We can go at our own pace. Stop whenever we want." She was silent for a long moment, just stirring her tea, the tiny clinking of the spoon against ceramic the only sound in the van. I held my breath. I never wanted to push her. The whole point of this journey was for it to be ours, together. If she said no, we'd find a gentle valley walk and it would still be a perfect day. But I also knew Karen. I knew that beneath the caution was a quiet strength I'd admired for over 30 years. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes clear and resolved. "All right, John," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "Let's go climb a mountain." A flicker of something, maybe excitement, maybe just pure determination, had replaced the apprehension in her eyes. The day's premise was set. We weren't just going for a hike, we were going to confront one of those figurative mountains I mentioned. And I had a feeling the view from the top would be about more than just the landscape. The drive to the trailhead was an adventure in itself. Wanda, our trusty van, felt like a loyal little beetle navigating the base of a giant's wall. The road twisted and turned in a series of hairpin bends that climbed ever higher, with each turn revealing an even more dramatic vista of stone and sky. Karen was a bit quiet beside me, her hands clasped in her lap, but she was looking out the window, really looking. She pointed out a cluster of wildflowers clinging stubbornly to a rock face, and a hawk circling on a thermal high above us. She was grounding herself in the details, a technique I'd seen her use before when feeling overwhelmed. It was her way of making the immense manageable. We parked Wanda in a small, gravel lot that seemed to be glued to the side of the mountain. Stepping out, the scale of it all hit us with renewed force. The air was thinner here, cleaner. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the sparse pines and the distant call of a marmot. We began the first part of the hike, a steady ascent on a well-trodden dirt path that wound its way through alpine meadows. It was beautiful and deceptively gentle, a pleasant warm-up for what was to come. The sun was warm on our backs, and for a while, it felt like any other mountain walk. We chatted easily, pointing out the funny, fuzzy-leafed edelweiss flowers and laughing as we were overtaken by a group of impossibly fit-looking Italian hikers who offered a cheerful "buongiorno," without even seeming out of breath. For a moment, I think we both forgot what we were heading towards. We were just two people, a little older, a little slower, enjoying a walk in one of the most beautiful places on earth. It was easy to feel confident here, surrounded by green meadows and the solid path under our feet. Then, we rounded a sharp bend, and the meadow ended. The path just stopped. Before us, the mountain changed character completely. The gentle, grassy slope gave way to a sheer, vertical face of pale gray rock. And running up it, like a metallic scar, was the beginning of the Via Ferrata. A thick steel cable was bolted into the rock, disappearing upwards, accompanied by a series of iron rungs hammered into the stone, forming a crude ladder to the heavens. This was it. The abstract idea of an iron path was now a very solid, very intimidating reality. I glanced over at Karen. All the color had drained from her face. She had come to a dead stop about 10 feet from the first rung, her walking poles held in a white-knuckled grip. She just stared at it, at the way the rock dropped away into nothingness below. The easy confidence of the meadow walk had evaporated into the thin mountain air. "Oh, John," she whispered, and her voice was small, fragile. "I don't think I can do this. I really don't think I can." This was the moment. The real challenge wasn't the rock face, it was the chasm of fear that had just opened up at our feet. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that no amount of cheerful encouragement was going to be enough to cross it. She had to find the bridge herself. I walked over to her and gently took her walking poles, collapsing them and strapping them to my pack. "That's okay," I said softly, making sure to keep my tone even and calm. "There's no pressure. None at all. Let's just sit down for a bit. We've got all day." I found a flat, stable-looking boulder a safe distance from the edge, and we sat. I didn't say anything else. I just opened our water bottle and handed it to her, then busied myself with unpacking our harnesses from my backpack, my movements slow and deliberate. We sat there for what must have been 15 minutes, in complete silence, just listening to the wind. Karen's breathing was shallow, and she kept her eyes fixed on her boots. Then, another couple appeared on the path behind us. They looked to be in their 60s, maybe even a little older than us. The man had a kind, weathered face and a cascade of white hair, and the woman was small and wiry, with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. They nodded at us, said their "buongiornos," and without a moment's hesitation, started gearing up. We watched as they moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency. They checked each other's harnesses, tugging on the straps. The woman went first. She clipped her 2 carabiners onto the steel cable, tested her weight on the first iron rung, and then began to climb. She moved slowly, gracefully, never seeming rushed or afraid. Her husband followed a few feet below her, calling out words of encouragement in Italian. They moved like a team, a well-oiled machine built on decades of trust. Karen watched them, her expression unreadable. She tracked their progress as they ascended, becoming smaller and smaller figures against the vast expanse of rock, until they were just 2 specks of bright color moving steadily upward. They made it look possible. They made it look like a dance. After they had disappeared over the first ledge, she finally turned to me. "They must have been doing this their whole lives," she said, almost to herself. "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe one day they were just like us, sitting on a rock, wondering if they could." I offered her a choice, the only real thing I could give her in that moment. "We can head back down to Wanda, have a cup of tea and a biscuit. It would still be a perfect day. Or, we can give it a try. Just the first 10 feet. If you don't like it, we turn around, no questions asked." I held out the harness. The decision was hers. Karen looked from my face to the harness in my hands, then back up at the silent, imposing rock face where the other couple had disappeared. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a battle being waged. It was the comfortable, predictable past versus the terrifying, unknown future. It was the person she had been versus the person she was trying to become. For a long moment, I thought fear had won. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and she let out a long, slow breath. Then, she looked straight at me, her gaze piercing and intense. "You know," she began, her voice low but firm, "when we sold the house, I was terrified. I was scared of leaving our friends, our garden, the little cafe where they knew my order. I was scared of getting sick in another country, of the van breaking down, of us getting on each other's nerves in such a tiny space." She paused, taking another breath. "I was scared of this. Exactly this. Of standing at the edge of something that felt too big, too high, too much. This was it. The real conversation. The Via Ferrata was just the stage. If I turn back now," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "if I let this fear send me back down the mountain, then what was the point of it all? What was the point of selling the sofa and packing our lives into 60 square feet? We didn't do all that just to seek out the easy paths, did we?" It was a rhetorical question, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was her aha moment. The climb wasn't about conquering a mountain, it was about refusing to be conquered by the very fears that this lifestyle was meant to liberate her from. She wasn't just talking about a rock face in Italy, she was talking about the entire philosophy of our new life. "No," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We certainly did not." A new resolve settled over her. It wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act in spite of it. "Okay," she said, reaching for the harness. "Show me how this works. But you have to promise me something. Anything. You stay right behind me. And you talk to me. Don't tell me not to be scared. Just talk. About anything. The weather. What we're having for dinner. That stupid time you tried to fix the sink and flooded the kitchen. Anything. Just keep me grounded." It was a brilliant strategy. Her problem-solving wasn't technical, it was profoundly human. She needed an anchor, not to the rock, but to our life, to our shared history. "It's a deal," I promised. We spent the next 10 minutes getting her kicked out. I showed her how the harness worked, how to tighten the leg loops and the waist belt so they were snug and secure. I demonstrated the Via Ferrata lanyard with its 2 elasticated arms and 2 carabiners. "It's called the Y system," I explained, keeping my voice as steady and instructional as a flight attendant's. "The rule is simple, you always have at least 1 carabiner clipped to the main steel cable. When you get to an anchor point, you unclip one, move it past the anchor, clip it back on, and only then do you move the second one. That way, you're never untethered." She practiced a few times on a low stretch of cable near the ground, her movements clumsy and hesitant at first, her hands shaking slightly as she fumbled with the gates of the carabiners. But she persisted. Click. Unclick. Click. She was building a new muscle memory, a ritual of safety she could fall back on when her mind started to panic. "Ready?" I asked, after she'd done it successfully a half-dozen times. She nodded, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on the first iron rung just a few feet away. She took a deep breath, walked to the base of the rock, and with a decisive click, clipped her first carabiner onto the cable. The sound echoed in the mountain silence. It was the sound of a commitment being made. She placed a trembling boot on the first rung, tested it, and then slowly, painstakingly, pulled herself up. She was on her way. The journey inward had begun. The first 50 feet were the hardest. Every movement was tense and deliberate. Karen's knuckles were white where she gripped the cold iron rungs, and her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. I followed a few feet below her, keeping my promise. I talked. I chattered away like a magpie, filling the anxious silence with the mundane and the familiar. "Remember that campsite in Spain?" I said, my voice echoing slightly against the rock. "The one where the goat kept trying to eat our welcome mat. I swear that thing had a personal vendetta against us." I saw her shoulders relax, just a fraction. She moved up another rung. "I was thinking pasta for dinner tonight. Pesto. Simple. Maybe we can find some fresh tomatoes in that village we passed." Another rung. Another foot of mountain conquered. I was her human anchor. My stream of pointless, rambling stories was her lifeline, a connection back to the solid ground of our shared world, even as she ascended into the terrifying vertical one. Slowly, a rhythm began to emerge. Her movements became less jerky, more fluid. She started to trust the equipment. She started to trust herself. The space between the iron rungs no longer looked like an impossible leap, but just the next step. Her mantra, her focus, narrowed to only that, the next handhold, the next foothold, the solid click of the carabiner. We reached the first major challenge, a traverse across a sheer face with nothing but a few carved toeholds and the steel cable for support. Below us, the world dropped away into a dizzying tapestry of green valleys and distant, snow-dusted peaks. Karen froze. I saw her whole body go rigid. "Don't look down," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Look at the rock. Look at your hands. Feel the texture of it. It's solid. It's been here for 1,000,000 years. It's not going anywhere." She took a shaky breath and pressed her cheek against the cool stone for a second, closing her eyes. When she opened them, she wasn't looking down anymore. She was looking ahead, at the next 10 feet of cable. She shuffled her feet sideways, one careful placement after another, her carabiner scraping along the wire with a sound that was now becoming reassuring. She made it to the next ledge and leaned back against the rock, her chest heaving. She hadn't looked down once. The peak of the experience, the true climax of the challenge, came in the form of a small, wobbly suspension bridge. It wasn't long, maybe only 30 feet, but it spanned a deep, shadowy chasm. 2 thick cables for your hands, and a series of wooden slats for your feet, just wide enough for one boot at a time. The wind, which had been a whisper before, now seemed to find this gap and funnel through it with a mournful howl, making the whole structure sway gently. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Karen breathed, her voice a mix of disbelief and horror. This was the stuff of her nightmares. It was a test of nerve designed by a sadist. I was right behind her. "We don't have to," I said immediately. "There's a bypass route. It adds an hour to the climb, but it's all solid rock." I wanted her to know the choice was still hers. She hadn't failed if she chose the other path. She stood there for a full minute, just staring at the bridge. I could almost see the war going on behind her eyes. Then she did something that amazed me. She laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, more like a short, sharp bark of incredulous humor. "A bypass route," she said, shaking her head. "After all this, you think I'm taking the bypass route? We didn't come this far just to come this far." She was quoting a line from some inspirational poster she'd seen, and hearing it now, in her own voice, in this place, was incredible. She clipped onto the bridge cable, took a deep, centering breath, and stepped out into the void. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead at the anchor point on the other side as if her gaze alone could pull her across. 1 foot. Then the next. The bridge swayed. She paused, waited for it to steady, and then continued. I followed, my heart in my throat, not for my own safety, but for hers. I was watching one of the bravest things I had ever seen. When her foot touched the solid rock of the other side, a massive, shuddering sigh of relief escaped her. She turned back to me, her face alight with a wild, triumphant grin. Her hair was windswept, there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and she looked absolutely, breathtakingly beautiful. I did it, John, she yelled over the wind, her voice full of pure, unadulterated joy. I did it. I knew you could. I yelled back, scrambling across the last few feet of the bridge to join her. The moment I was on solid ground, she threw her arms around my neck, and we just stood there, clinging to each other on a tiny ledge, hundreds of feet in the air. The relief and exhilaration were so potent they were almost a physical force. It wasn't just about the bridge. It was about everything. It was the culmination of a journey that had started months ago, with a conversation over a kitchen table about a different kind of life. We finally pulled apart and looked around. We had reached the summit. We were standing on top of the world. The 360-degree panorama was staggering. Jagged peaks marched away in every direction, their sharp edges softened by the afternoon sun. Tiny villages were nestled in the green valleys far, far below. The world we had left on the ground seemed a million miles away. The view was magnificent, but what made it truly priceless was the knowledge of what it had taken to earn it. We weren't just tourists who had taken a cable car, we were pilgrims who had completed a journey. We found a sheltered spot, shrugged off our backpacks, and broke out the squashed sandwiches and lukewarm water that suddenly felt like the most delicious feast we'd ever had. We didn't talk much at first, just sat there, munching in contented silence, soaking in the feeling of accomplishment. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and a fierce, burning pride. Karen had faced her dragon and won. The hike down was a different experience entirely. Our legs were tired, but our spirits were soaring. We took the easy path, the long, winding trail that contoured back down to the meadows. The tension was gone, replaced by a light, easy banter. Karen seemed to have grown 3 inches taller. There was a new confidence in her stride, a new brightness in her eyes. The mountain hadn't changed, but she had. She was no longer just admiring the landscape, she was a part of it. She had met its challenge and earned her place there. When Wanda finally came into view in the gravel car park, she looked like a little beacon of home. I've never been so happy to see our van. Getting back inside felt like a huge, warm hug. It was our safe harbor, our sanctuary. We kicked off our dusty boots, and the first thing Karen did was put the kettle on. The simple, familiar ritual of making tea was the perfect end to such an extraordinary afternoon. I still can't quite believe I did that, she said, sinking onto the bench seat with a grateful sigh, cradling the warm mug in her hands. She looked out the window at the peak we had just stood on top of, a dark silhouette against the deepening orange sky. I replied, sitting opposite her. I never doubted you for a second. She gave me a wry smile. You're a terrible liar, John. You were just as nervous as I was. I laughed because she was right. Okay, fine. Maybe I was a little nervous. But I knew you had it in you. I've always known how strong you are. We sat there for a long time, replaying the day's events. We talked about the terrifying traverse, the wobbly bridge, the glorious moment of reaching the summit. We laughed about how my non-stop chatter about goats and pasta had somehow worked as a coping mechanism. The fear, now viewed from the safety of the van, had lost its power. It was no longer a monster in the shadows, but just a part of the story, a necessary ingredient that made the triumph so much sweeter. As dusk settled over the Dolomites, we found a perfect spot to park for the night, a quiet pull-off with an uninterrupted view of the mountain range. We set up our camp chairs outside Wanda, wrapped ourselves in blankets, and watched as the last rays of sun painted the peaks in shades of pink and gold, the famous alpenglow. It was a time for deeper reflection. The adrenaline had subsided, leaving behind a clear, quiet space for the day's true meaning to sink in. It was Karen who broke the comfortable silence. "That fear I felt today," she said, her voice soft and thoughtful, "it wasn't just about heights. I've been carrying a version of that fear around with me since we started this whole thing." I knew exactly what she meant. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of leaving behind the security and predictability of the life we had spent 30 years building. It was the quiet, nagging voice that whispered, "What if you can't do this? What if you've made a terrible mistake?" For me, she continued, that Via Ferrata was a perfect metaphor for this entire van life journey. The path is right there, clear as day, and you have all the safety gear, all the tools you need. But it still takes a monumental act of faith to take that first step off solid ground. To trust the gear, to trust your partner, and most of all, to trust yourself. This was the heart of it all. This was the lesson the mountain had been waiting to teach her. We didn't choose this life because it was easy. We chose it because it was challenging. We chose it to feel alive, to replace the numbness of routine with the sharp, vibrant sensations of joy, and yes, even fear. It's not about ticking off destinations on a map. It's about the internal landscapes we navigate along the way. It's about finding the courage to step onto the wobbly bridge, knowing that the view on the other side is worth the terror of the crossing. "This is exactly why we're doing this," I said, reaching over to take her hand. "Not just to see the world, but to see what we're made of." This experience, this single afternoon, had reinforced our core philosophy more than 1,000 miles of easy driving ever could. True freedom isn't about having no restrictions, it's about not letting your own internal restrictions define your world. The real takeaway for us, the moral of this story, was that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and clipping onto the cable anyway. It's taking a deep breath and putting one foot in front of the other, trusting that you have the strength to make it to the other side. Karen hadn't just climbed a mountain today, she had moved one. We sat there until the last of the alpenglow faded and the first stars pricked the dark velvet of the sky. Our plans for the next day were simple. After today's high-altitude drama, I think we've earned a lazy morning and a gentle drive down into the valley. Maybe we'll find a local market and treat ourselves to some good Italian cheese and bread. It's all about balance, this life. The thrilling highs and the quiet, simple pleasures. Some days on the road are about the miles you cover. But today was about the distance we traveled inside ourselves. It was a reminder that the greatest adventures often happen in the space between a frantic heartbeat and a determined breath. It was a day that will forever be a cornerstone of our journey, a story we'll tell for years to come. A story about a woman who was afraid of heights, but who found the courage to climb a mountain anyway. Thank you for coming along with us on this part of our journey. We hope it brought you a little bit of inspiration, and maybe encouraged you to look at a fear of your own and wonder what might be waiting on the other side of it. Until next time, keep living fully, 1 mile, and 1 story, at a time.